When I was 22, my full-time salaried income was, if I say the word compound interest to a beginner, I've lost them right away.
The way that I like to frame compound interest is in terms of an ability to multiply money. Use it before you lose it.
When you're 22, most of us were broke and we don't have any real ability to make money.
One of the misconceptions is, I will wait until I'm older, but it's really about starting early.
Why should a 22-year-old put money in a 401k?
Yeah, money under very common circumstances can double every 10 years. So if you're William Bengen and you're saying, okay, it's either 4% or 5% that we're pulling out, there's a lot of it still left to multiply. Okay, question. Do you know how to solve a Rubik's Cube?
If you are a complete beginner at finances, or if you know someone who is, this episode is for you. The number one thing that I hear from beginners is, oh, I need to learn more about money. But it feels complicated. It feels overwhelming. In today's episode, Scott Yamamura joins us to share 3 frameworks for thinking about compound interest. Welcome to the Afford Anything podcast, the show that understands you can afford anything, but not everything. Every choice carries a trade-off, and that applies to your money, time, focus, and energy. This show covers 5 pillars: financial psychology, increasing your income, investing, real estate, and entrepreneurship. It's double I FIRE. I'm your host, Paula Pant. I trained in economic reporting at Columbia, and I help you understand money so that you can build wealth. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much. Good to be here, Paula.
It's great for you to join us. Scott, if I say the word compound interest to a beginner, I've lost them right away because that sounds boring. That sounds like something that your 8th grade math teacher would talk about. But what if we talk a little bit differently? What if we talk about the ability that a person has? Let's say you're 22. What kind of ability do you have?
Right. So compound interest, that's an old banker's term, and it kind of can rub us the wrong way. It feels like it's cold, hard, and is like hugging a cash register. It's about as comfortable as that.
Right.
So what if we've reframed compound interest? There's so many different ways to say it. There's save early, save 15% of your income, have 10 times your income saved by the time you're retiring. There's so many ways to get at this effect of compound interest. But I think for the current generation, it might be nice to hear it a different way. So the way that I like to frame compound interest is in terms of an ability to multiply money. So when you think about that, an ability, it really pulls us away from the accumulation of wealth. And many people, it might be from their families, their culture, their faith, or otherwise, the accumulation of wealth might be something that you don't talk about. It might be something that feels a little taboo even. But an ability that we have to multiply money, that's something that has to do with us. It's not about this object that we're storing up. It has to do with an ability we have, a lot more like athletic ability, say, for instance. You mentioned the age 22. So, for instance, Olympic gymnasts, Olympic ice skaters, NFL football players, when are they all in their prime? It's very commonly in their early 20s. So we have this amazing physical ability that dissipates over time. There's this corridor of time where an athlete needs to jump on their ability before it goes away. And the same thing is with money. Money actually is very much like that, where when they say invest early, I wish I could go back and do it all over again. People are talking about in their 20s, retirees are talking about going back to their 20s and saying, let me invest with vigor and with gusto at this time, because that's like the parallel of when I had my greatest athletic ability. I had my greatest money multiplying ability at that time. So thinking about money in terms of an ability, it really changes it. It takes away all the taboo and it says, hey, do this now before you lose it. Use it before you lose it.
But I'm going to push back on that a little because it's easy with the benefit of hindsight when you're 50 and you're making the most money you've ever made because you're so deep into your career and you've achieved seniority and you've had many promotions, right? It's easy at that age to project your current income situation backwards and say, oh man, if I had only saved more then. Whereas when you're 22, for most of us, we're broke and we don't have any real ability to make money.
Yeah, no, I think that's perfect. And I've thought through these different avenues because one of the misconceptions is I will wait until I'm older because that's when I'll make more. That is when I will be promoted. That is when I'll have more resources to use. However, very commonly, lifestyle inflation comes into play. Some of the statistics say up to 78% of folks might be living paycheck to paycheck at any age and stage in their career. 77% might be in debt, up to about 100,000 or so. And so it's very common at every stage, even up until retirement, to be practicing these principles with money where we're just not investing, we're just not acting with confidence. And so it's a common misconception. Let's wait until my career's further along. Let's wait until I understand money better. Let's wait until I can make better investment decisions and really get this. But it's really about, for the common person, starting early. Starting early in very common things, a 401k plan, an IRA, the S&P 500 index fund, or a target date mutual fund. If we got started, the common person at age 22 with any of those, that, by comparison, many advisors say does a lot more good than waiting to 52 and getting started then with gusto. That comparison, I've heard one advisor say that the first 10 years of investing is worth about the latter 30
right.
career.
But I mean, when I was 22, my income, my full-time salaried income was $21,000 annually. That was in 2007, so you have to adjust for inflation. But adjusted for inflation, let's say that's ballpark about $30,000 a year in today's dollars, right? So when you're earning a full-time salary of $30,000 a year and you're paying rent, you're paying utilities, you're paying for your gas. At that time, I was paying for my health insurance because that was prior to Obamacare. And so you couldn't stay on your parents' health insurance until you were 26. So you're paying health insurance. I mean, it's incredibly hard on a $30,000 annual salary to set aside even a couple $100s a month.
Yeah.
And this is a beginner's episode. So speaking to all of the beginners out there, who a lot of them, I'm sure, are listening to this thinking, well, this just sounds out of touch. I make 30 grand a year. I've got student debt.
No, I think that's beautiful to look at that because that's reality. And so advisors and financial coaches will just commonly say, do what you can. Now, doing what you can with understanding is totally different. Without that understanding, we act timidly. And that's exactly what I did. Some of the decisions I would have done differently is, for instance, instead of buying a new car with debt, probably buying used.
I mean, okay, when I was 22, my car was $400. Not $400 a month. The car was $400. The entire car was $400.
That's incredible.
Yeah, the guy wanted $450 for it, but I talked him down to $400.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
so, you got a much better deal than I did.
So again, for a beginner who's broke, nobody's even thinking about buying a new car. Your apartment isn't even safe enough to park one outside of it. It would get stolen like within a day.
Yeah, certainly there's going to be different folks at different income levels, different stages, different levels of support from the family, this or that. But once again, coming back to if there's understanding, we can act differently just with that understanding as our foundation. Commonly are bringing up that age of 22. We have potentially our first career, we're done with college, and we have this opportunity to invest. We might be hearing about a 401k plan for the very first time if the company that we work at offers that. And so if we have that understanding, it can even come years before we're preparing. We can prepare for that rather than being surprised. And many of my colleagues were middle-aged and were starting right now to become interested and versed in finances. And I myself wish I had known that back when I started earning. So, yeah.
Now, the math around every dollar that you invest when you're 22, assuming that you have a 40-year career, that dollar that you invest at the age of 22, it multiplies 16 times, assuming a 7.2% long-time annualized interest rate. But since this episode is for beginners, I want to really focus on that 22-year-old who is driving a $400 car, or with inflation, maybe it's a $600 car in today's dollars. When you're driving a car that's that cheap, you know it's going to break down. And so you know you need a little bit of money set aside for those repairs. And then for most people at 22, they've got student loans. The majority of college graduates have student loans. So why should a 22-year-old put money in a 401k?
Yeah. I want to harken back really quickly to the athlete thing because it's hard when we're squeezed like that. And if we think about someone who has the ability to become, say, an NFL quarterback, and if they started to play middle school or so football, and someone told them, you have this potential, you need to do this. You might need to make sacrifices. You might need to own the $400 car. You might need to go mow some lawns. You might need to go do these sacrifices in order to play football, because I think you've got this knack. And if you keep with this, you're going places, and this is you're gonna regret if you don't ever do this and you miss this opportunity. That's why I like going back to ability, because we're willing to make sacrifices and we're willing to figure it out, because our number one, a big enough why can overcome any how. We will figure the rest out when we have a big enough why. And that's why I love coming back to athleticism and paralleling that with multiplying money. Okay, now back to age 22. So rules of thumb. If most people look at finances as a dry, uninteresting, intimidating thing full of shame, guilt, and regret, that's very, very common for folks. And like I said, if most of us, by the time we reach middle age, are thinking, I have this wake-up call with finances now, I might need to be taking care of my parents someday. That's going to take finances. I'm thinking of retiring one day. That's not too far off. I need to be thinking about finances. My children are going into college. I needed to be thinking about finances. We're pretty much going to be faced with thinking about finances by middle age. But we need rules of thumb. So if people have not thought about finances because it's so challenging and we've had analysis paralysis up to a certain point, then what about offering a simplified way? And that's what I try to do through offering up financial epiphanies. So the first financial epiphany, which is a rule of thumb, is that money under very common circumstances can double every 10 years. So if we have $1 and we put it in a very common place to invest, 401k plan, IRA, brokerage account, at a very common 7.2% interest rate, which those sorts of investments, statistics will say they might bring around 5 to 8% return. Now, if it's the stock market we're just looking at, that might be about 7 to 10% annualized rate of return. So I like 7.2 because it leads to easy math.
Right.
Money,
and
yes.
Just to pause here, so what you're talking about is what's called the rule of 72. It's a mental math shortcut in which 72 divided by the long-term annualized rate of growth on your money is the amount of time that it takes for your money to double. So, for example, if you earn a long-term annualized 7.2% interest rate, it'll take 10 years for your money to double. If you earn a long-term annualized 8% interest rate, your money will double in 9 years. Long-term 9% annualized interest rate, your money will double in 8 years, and so on and so forth.
Thanks for pointing that out. Yeah, running under the hood of the financial epiphanies is the rule of 72. And that is another rule of thumb that actually is very helpful because it can get you to win with money by simply knowing a very grade school-like calculation.
Right.
And so we've got this 72 divided by 7.2 rate of return equals 10 years to double our money. Now we have a very simple path to look at. We've got, okay, every 10 years, money can double no matter what I put in. If I put in $1 or $1,000 or $10,000, this thing is multiplying by double every 10 years. So, and then if we bring in another very common number within anyone's career, 40 years of work. So what I like to do is start to lock in numbers because money can be very much like a constantly roving variable, running races around us. So, but if we asked money to please pause, sit down and behave long enough for us to understand it, by choosing numbers, by choosing a very common path to take, we're talking about starting a career at age 22. We're talking about a 40-year career and earning this 7.2% rate of return over these 40 years. Now we really can start to understand it. Money can be doubling every 10 years. That means when we put in $1, it's 10 years later, it's 2. 10 years later, it's 4. 10 years later, it's 8. 10 years later, it's 16. So after a 40-year career, we have this multiplying power of 16. And that comes back to our ability. We have the multiplying power of 16 when we start our careers. You could also say it this way. Say you took a different path and went to school longer, started your career later. Well, you have that multiplying power of 16 if you work a 40-year career, even if you start at age 32. Or let's say you work an even longer career and you work 50 years. Now you don't have the multiplying power of 16 anymore. You have the multiplying power of 32. So these familiar numbers of doubling, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, they're lovely because we can continually refer back to them again and again and again to understand I'm at this age. My multiplying power is currently 4, I might say. So I'll say, okay, well, every, $10,000 I put in can turn into $40,000 at retirement. Maybe I won't go buy this. Maybe I'll go ahead and choose to invest that instead because I have an understanding of the input and the output. And that's the power in all of this.
So just to make the math clear, all right, so when you're 22, you put in $1. Mm-hmm. By the time you're 32, that $1 has turned into $2. By the time you're 42, those $2 have turned into $4. By the time you are 52, that's turned into $8. And by the time you're 62, it's turned into $16.
16.
And if you work until you're 72, and heck, even if you don't, you're not going to withdraw your entire retirement balance on the day that you retire.
Not all of it.
So some portion of your money that you put into your retirement accounts will still be there when you're 72. Yeah. So that portion of your money that's still in your retirement account, by the age of 72, that has now turned into $32. And
correct.
When you're 82, that's now $64.
64. Yeah, so if you're William Bengen, then you're saying, okay, it's either 4% or 5% that we're pulling out. There's a lot of it still left to multiply. And that's the lovely part. This book really focuses on the most common scenario, which is working age 22 to 62. So yes, of course, we can continue to keep multiplying money after that. We may use something like the bucket system to have different ways of conserving money and spending money while all this out here is still left to multiply in the market. But because we're spending it down, and it's very common for a retiree for their account to diminish slowly over time. It's no longer doubling on its own. It's definitely staying where it's at. It might go up for some, but for many of us, it slightly goes down. And so that gets a little bit more complicated. Maybe that's book 2.
Right, because this is a beginner's episode, so we want to stay focused on the basics for people who are starting out. But so far in this conversation, we have assumed that you're a beginner and you're 22 years old. What if you're a beginner and you're 52 years old? Let's say that you woke up today and it's your 52nd birthday and you're going, gosh, I'm in my early 50s and I really haven't thought about retirement savings yet.
Yes, I love this question. At age 52, what we're saying with this rules of thumb, these financial epiphanies, is that we have the power of 2 at the age of 52, when we have 10 more years to have our money double. And that's just for money that we have invested already, that we can continue to put more in. And what I love about that is because Warren Buffett, the famed investor, says that if we're born in America, that we have won the ovarian lottery. And by that, he means that in America, we have prosperity and we have opportunity like nowhere else. In fact, in a few weeks, I'll be going to Sierra Leone, Africa. And that's known as one of the poorest countries of the world. There are places in the world where money doubling is just not even possible. It's just not going to happen. And so we are so fortunate here. The doubling of money, say you go into a casino with $1,000 and you come out with $2,000. And you just won against the house. You're feeling very good, very good. The doubling of money is no small thing. We are very fortunate to live in a place where that is possible. And to value that, it is something else. Now, when we're younger, we have a greater multiplying power and money can double more. And so, all right, you say the age 52. Now, many at the age 52 will have kids that might be going into college or something. So another thing besides looking out for ourselves and doubling our money and maybe even doubling down and doing things like putting in even more into our 401k plan, what the government allows us to do, those extra amounts that we can put in to multiply.
The catch-up contributions.
As we can start looking at the younger generation, whether it's our own family, whether it's nieces, nephews, grandchildren, because they're coming up right behind us and they may not know about their multiplying power. So I think it's very important to consider, would we be willing to invest in the younger generation?
Right. But if you're 52 and you're not prepared for retirement, you have virtually no balance in your 401k, a very small balance in your 401k. Mm-hmm. What do you do for yourself?
Right. So absolutely jumping in with investing in the 401k because of the company match and tax advantages and this and that. We have other considerations. Financial advisors may lay out options such as, do you want to retire at age 62 or are you willing to work longer? That will give your money, without touching it, more time to multiply. So the options are to increase income and decrease expenses. So some of those suggestions might be working longer. And so now if instead of retiring at 62, many people are deciding to retire later as they realize maybe they didn't take advantage of their multiplying power. And so if it's 72, just looking at these numbers simply, now they've gone from the multiplying power and the ability to multiply money by 2, now it's 4. Now they can 4x their retirement account, and they can, meanwhile, dollar cost average money into that over those 20 years as well. But absolutely, that's one of the ways that we can increase our income later is by increasing our working years.
So when we talk about compound interest, there are really 3 core ideas that we want to draw out. One is what we talked about earlier with the rule of 72, that money doubles, and the time in which it takes for money to double is 72 divided by the long-term annualized rate of return. So if we assume that our money is going to make a 7.2% return over the long term, then that means our money is going to double every 10 years.
Yes.
So that's the first core idea that we want to draw out related to compound interest.
Yes.
And then the second core idea is what we've also just talked about, which is that if you're 22, every dollar that you put in turns into $16 by the time you're 62. So that's the second core idea.
Talk about ages.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas if you're 52, every dollar that you put in turns into $4, assuming that you retire at the age of 72. The corollary to all of that, though, is a halving. Can you talk about that?
Yes, halving as in HALF, half. So Daniel Kahneman talks about loss aversion, very common study. And we know that the feeling of losing something is twice as painful as the great feeling of gaining something. And so when we think about compound interest, we think about, well, okay, so I'm going to gain $1,000 later, right? Okay, that feels good. Now, if we think about losing $1,000, now all of a sudden that hurts twice as much. We feel twice as much impact by that, by losing 1,000 than gaining 1,000. This concept of halving takes advantage of loss aversion because we as human beings, we hate to lose things. It has double the impact on us. And so this is what I mean by that. Is that when we have the power of 16, the multiplying power of 16 with our money that we invest at age 22, and 10 years later, it halves into the power of 8 at age 32, that can cause a sense of urgency. Oh my goodness, I had the power of 16, and 10 years, I have the power of 8. I better act now. Every dollar that I invest now is going to do so much more than if I wait. And if I wait from age 32 to 42, where I have the power of 4, oh my goodness, I just had the power of 8, now I have the power of 4. It's halving. And so it causes this sense of urgency. And because loss aversion is so powerful for the human system, it's something we can take advantage of. It's something that can cause us to take action. It has a little bit of a sting, yes. And once again, to harken back to that of a sports athlete, you're not going to be able to be the star NFL player until you're 60 or until you're 70. It is going to go away. Your sports ability is going to diminish, and we all know that. And it even parallels into just being a human being. Eyesight's going to go, bones are going to creak. Not everything is going to work as well when we're 60 or 70. We all understand that. If we could come to the place where we understand money does the same thing, it follows the same path, then it can cause a sense of urgency and it can cause us to take action, because what's on the other side of that? Money sitting there that we like to find a place to spend instead. It tends to get spent. And so what we're trying to do is to give people the motivation to instead spend their money that's sitting around, is to instead choose to invest it. There's a sense of urgency here.
That does create a sense of urgency, knowing that with each new decade of life, your power to multiply your money gets cut in half. If a person who's listening to this is trying to balance the desire to put money into retirement accounts with the reality that they have student loans, maybe they have some credit card debt, how do they balance those two?
Right. So once again, a big enough why can overcome any how. So if we now understand something, now I do want to put out the word there timidly, because without a big enough why, I acted timidly with money. Just why would I waste my time with this? Why would I go in with any gusto if I just don't know what's going to happen? So we tend to act timidly. But if we understand our multiplying power, if we understand the urgency that it is decreasing, that it is diminishing over time, we'll make those sacrifices. And now at least we're acting with some level of confidence. We know what's going to happen. Before we had no idea. And we will get that wake-up call later and see what's happening to our finances. And I have seen that happen, is that, by the time I'm ready to find out what happened, whoops, I wish I could go back 10 years. I wish I could go back 20 years. I would have done things differently. And so regardless of our income and regardless of our past behaviors, and if we found ourselves in debt, whether they were good choices or not, I tend to think that a big enough why can overcome anyhow. And that basically means when we understand our multiplying power, we'll be able to make those sacrifices. And it's always going to be, can we increase our income and can we decrease our expenses? And we'll find a way. So we have that capacity to adapt.
So far, what we've talked about are 3 ways that a beginner can think about compound interest, 3 different framings of compound interest that are ideally motivating for anyone who's just getting started. The next thing I'd like to discuss is that in order to keep that motivation going, you need a big why, right? Because there are so many spending temptations. You need a why that is bigger than all of that. So we're going to talk about money with a purpose. How did you find and maintain a why behind your money?
So we talk about having a big enough why to keep us on track with finances. Now, there's something I call the path of snares and traps that can certainly stop us. And if we don't have a plan with our money, these things are going to come after us. I call them the 5 C's of financial debt. So it could be credit card, car, college, cake. Under that is experiences.
Like let them eat cake?
And wedding cake. So wedding, for instance, average wedding costs about $30,000, $10,000 is borrowed. So these are the big things we borrow and spend big on. And then condo, where we might buy a bigger house and become house poor because of those things. These things are coming for us, and they're waiting right around the corner for our money if we don't have a big enough why. And so what I look at is to have a people-based why. When we're looking for a product, we're looking for a deal. We're waiting for it to go on sale. We're willing to haggle the price down. We want a good deal for our money when it comes to a product. But when it comes to people and purpose, there's no price tag. The value of a person is limitless. It's infinite. And so when we have money for a product, that's one thing. But when we have money to invest in to the betterment of someone's life, there's just no limit on that. And we may even feel like if we've got money to improve others' lives, that may be the reason we're on this earth. That may be the reason why I have available funds. And so let's talk about that a little bit, a people-based why. So in a few weeks, I'm going to head to Sierra Leone with my family, my son and wife. They haven't been there yet.
How old is your son?
My son is 15.
Nice.
And so
Will this be his first trip to Sierra Leone?
This will be his first trip to Sierra Leone. And so we've been to Korea. He's half Korean, half Japanese. He's been to Japan. This is going to be a lot different to Sierra Leone because it's traditionally been one of the poorest countries in the world. And the unemployment rate is around 70%. I've been there before and I've served. Now, when we go this time, it's going to be to help film a video that can be used to raise funds to build schools, churches, and clinics, and to help with basic needs to many of the villagers there. And so my son and I will be teaming up, and he's learning the skill of videography, and we're gonna go try to tell these stories and later pull on some heartstrings so others here in the U.S. might support some of our folks on the other side of what we call the bridge. The organization we're going to be going with is called the Bridge of Hope. Now, I want to look back at the first time that I went there.
When was this?
About 8 years ago. Yeah, I headed out to Sierra Leone on a mission trip with about 15 others. And filmed a video about this organization that builds schools. And the thing that really caught me is that when there's not a school in the village that these elementary school kids go to, they may have to walk 2 hours each way along a desolate road. And we're talking about cars, strangers, kidnappings, all sorts of things can and do happen. So when there is a school in the very village that these kids live in, there's safety and there's an education that occurs, and this child can grow up to be a contributor to their society and their culture when they are kept safe by having a school right there where they live, just a few minutes walk. And so we went to go serve the folks in Sierra Leone and tell the stories of what this organization is doing. And I was there for about 2 weeks. I came back and worked on the editing of this video to create about a 7-minute piece, the annual fundraising event for the Bridge of Hope. And I was sat next to this tall gentleman named Ernie getting himself around with a cane. And I wondered, well, I wonder why, with this arranged seating, why I'm sitting right next to Ernie. I wonder if we have something in common here. Well, it turns out Ernie had chosen to fund my trip there. He personally, without ever having met me, he funded my trip. And I had learned that. And it was at that moment that my heart just melted. And I thought, here's a man that I've never met before. He funded my trip to go tell this story of this organization that is helping lives over there on the other side of the world. And he just chose to do it. Now, he couldn't go boots on the ground to Sierra Leone himself because of his age and where he was physically, but he certainly could send other people to do so. Now, the video eventually played, and the time came to donate money for anybody that was there. And he leans over to me and he says, Scott, that's the first time I've seen that video. And he said, on the car ride here with my wife, we had already decided on the amount we were going to give. And he said, don't tell her, but I just doubled it. And it was the greatest sense of joy and elation I've ever seen in a human being. Mm. And he could do that because he had multiplied his money and he had some to put towards purpose. Mm. He could because there was available resources. Mm. And that has been life-changing for me to have experienced that in this elderly gentleman. And I just felt like he was my uncle at that point. I felt like he was related just within an hour of knowing this man. And we were already so connected. I wanted other people to know about it because I felt so impacted. Now that's following a people-based why. Multiply money, sure, if we have another $1,000 in the 401k account, that's great. If we paid down debt, that's great. These are all wonderful things, and we want to take care of our own selves and our own families. But if we can get to that point of going beyond that, that's something else. It's like getting in the carpool lane where there are miracles happening all the time. If we choose to put ourselves there, that's where these things are being experienced. And money is only one of the ways where these miracles can happen. But if we put ourselves to the task of multiplying money, there's so much good that can be done out there.
Right. The best type of impulse spending is spontaneous giving.
I love it. I love it. Yes. Yeah, that's great.
Right? Because that's what Ernie did, that spontaneous giving.
That's exactly what he did. I mean, we can be at the cash register and pick up a pack of bubble gum we weren't planning on and do that spontaneous spending. But in his case, he gave in that way. And it impacted so many of us. I called the organization back and I told them that story that had happened. And they were so encouraged because they knew what was going on. They knew he had paid for my trip to go. And they had sat him right next to me. They knew what they were doing.
Right.
So I gave them that feedback and I just said, I think you changed my life by having done that. Thank you.
Wow. We actually, back in 2018, I encouraged the Afford Anything community to donate. My goal was to have the Afford Anything community donate enough money to build a well in another country through charity water. And my goal for that calendar year was, can just the Afford Anything community, us as Afford Anything, can we put together enough money? I think it was somewhere around $20,000. Can we put together enough money that we ourselves, just us, solely sponsor the construction of one water project? And we didn't know specifically what the water project would be, and we didn't know where it would be. The way charity water works is once the money is collected, then they'll talk to their in-country partners, and they'll look at the needs, and they'll assess that point in time, and then they'll let us know where it's going and specifically what it's going to be used for. So for most of 2018, it was bumping along. You know, we were collecting a few $100s in donations every week, but there was no massive inflection point until I've never met this person, right? But one member of this community announced that he would match all donations, right? So the money would double. Anyone who, right?
There it is again.
And so then when I told the Afford Anything community, I was like, hey, do you want to know the easiest risk-free way to double your money? Give it to Charity Water, give it to this fundraising campaign that we're doing with Charity Water, and your money is instantly going to double. And the moment that happened, boom, we funded the project.
Just like that.
And it turned out that money was spent on a well built in Sierra Leone.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wow. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
This is all aligning. I'll go visit it in a few weeks.
So, yeah, on the topic of Sierra Leone and on the topic of doubling money.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And I guess for the beginners, again, because this is a beginner's episode, what we're really highlighting here is the joy, that why, which really drives the purpose of getting good with money.
Yeah, it's having that big enough. Another thing that might want to take us off track is once we build wealth, because that's what can happen when we're multiplying it, is that there can be other things that take us off track. It could be a 401k loan, right? Taking out a loan from a 401k. It could be home equity loan, things like that. Not that these things are terrible in themselves, but if they're not right for us, they can take us off track immediately. But if we have that big enough why, it can keep us on the straight and narrow, because I'm going to say it's a hard path to build wealth and be purposeful with it and to wait for that multiplying to happen, especially because most of us who are investing, the common person, is going to be able to tap into the resources at 59 and a half. And so, boy, what happens then? Are we going on a spending spree, or what's happening? But to keep that people-based why in place there when those resources are finally available to us, it can keep us on track to the very, very end.
Right. Has your why changed over time? What was your why when you were 22?
Well, at age 22, 90% of us are employees and 10% are self-employed. And so at age 22, you're feeling like you're working for somebody else, the common person. That's what I was doing, working a corporate job. And a lot of things about my why might have been following somebody else's vision, right? Okay, my why might be part of an organization that I'm not running, but I'm going to participate. I'm going to go ahead and participate in this. And I did, harkening back to sports once again, I was involved with a sports organization that served teenagers. And we are trying to keep them clean, out of distraction, drugs, or these other things that could take them away from being good at their sport. We tried to keep them focused on their sport. You can see why I like this sports analogy so much.
Yeah.
We're willing to make sacrifices if we have that bigger why. And we were trying to say it's this sport. And so I think it starts out with being a participant and a contributor. And then eventually I started my own organizations when I got to that point, and I started one called Created to Create, and we do videos for nonprofit organizations. That's the very reason why we're going to Sierra Leone. And now it's turning into personal finance, where I want to get people good with their money, because I've been hearing for many, many years now, decades, of it's a struggle and we don't understand it. So I'm not going to do anything. I have analysis paralysis. That's a very common feeling. And so if we can get people to be good with their money, they can be empowered, they can feel confident, and then they can start to apply their own why, whether it's a people-based why, and they can put their money to the task of multiplying and growing in purpose, not growing in wealth, growing in purpose.
Now, many beginners feel analysis paralysis because the world of money seems so complicated. We've talked so far about compound interest. Mm-hmm. We've talked about purpose. We've really talked about the why behind it, right? Compound interest is the mathematical why, and purpose is the spiritual why. But beyond the why, there's the logistics of how. Mm-hmm. And that's where it can feel, for a beginner, very overwhelming, because all of a sudden you're getting into the world of asset allocation and you're trying to choose investments and you're wondering if you should invest in crypto, right? And when a person is just starting out and they don't, quote unquote, know much about money, which is something that I hear a lot from the beginners in this community, that how can feel very overwhelming. Do you have any tips for how to simplify the how?
I love that question. Okay, question. Do you know how to solve a Rubik's Cube?
My grandfather does. Well, he passed away, but my grandfather, while he was alive, could solve a Rubik's Cube in a minute or two.
Yeah, that's wonderful. 4% of the population knows how to solve a Rubik's Cube, even though it's one of the most proliferous playthings in the world and one of the most sold toys. So Erno Rubik, a Hungarian architect, he developed the toy and it just blew up. So there's 6 sides, 54 squares, and all the combinations on there, 43 quintillion possible combinations of those colors. Now that's a couple sets of zeros and commas beyond a trillion.
I was going to say, how many is a quintillion? 43 quintillion.
43 quintillion. Yes.
Quintillion?
Yeah.
Quintillion.
Go ahead and practice saying that. That doesn't apply much to the world of finances just yet. But we're talking about a Rubik's Cube here. And so I have a lot of Rubik's Cubes inside my house. Small ones, pyramid-shaped ones with 9 squares on each side, 16 squares. They're all over the place. And I would pick one up and try to fool with it, try to get one side, and then put it down and have no idea what I was doing. I felt like an imposter. I felt like it wasn't for me. I felt like it had to be someone that was more technical than me. I didn't belong. And so decades pass, the Rubik's Cubes are strewn throughout the house, unsolved. And one day my son comes up to me and he says, "Dad, I want to figure this out." He says, "Will you do this with me?" And at that point I thought, okay, if I agree to this, either he's going to figure it out and I'm not, and I'm going to just feel totally diminished as a parent, which is probably rightly so, or he may ask questions and I have no idea how to go about doing this. Well, what we did was we looked up one way out of all the varieties of ways of getting this figured out, and we looked up one way. It wasn't going to be the fastest, so it wasn't going to be like a speed cuber who can do this in 10 seconds or less. But it wasn't going to be where we figured it out on our own and had to track every single move that we made. We were going to watch someone that had already figured out for us in the simplest way for us to succeed. The simplest way, not the most complex, not one that was going to take years and years of practice, one where we could put in, say, the least amount of time and still get it figured out. And so we did. Robbie Gonzalez of Wired Magazine had a YouTube video out that he had put out on how to solve this. And to put it simply, you figure out the bottom layer, and then you figure out the middle layer, and then you figure out the top layer. And I never knew that. I had no idea. But in the way that he describes it, it makes it so that someone like me, who had walked by this toy for decades, now could figure it out. And we did. We did figure it out. And there's some algorithms that you do need to figure out later in the process. One is FIRF, front, up, right, up, front. And there's RR, right, up, right, up, right, up, right. And there's these algorithms that you need to memorize, which I love. But that's all part of the process. You learn those later because there's simple steps in the beginning. The simple steps are, 1, create the yellow daisy, yellow square in the middle, white on the sides. Very easy to do. And that's coming back to finances now, is that we don't need to learn every single way that finances can be done. Finances, just like that 43 quintillion number, finances can have just a limitless number. Let's say if there was, like we mentioned, various ages to start work at. Did we start work at 16, 17, 18, 19? Did we start at 40? There could be 20 options there. There could be, as far as how long a career is. Well, we could say it was 20 years, or we could say it's 50 years. There's so many varieties there. What's your rate of return? Well, we could say it's 3%. We could say it's 10%, and everything in between. And that could end up with hundreds of thousands of possibilities, just like a Rubik's Cube. But if we choose one way and we cut through all the constantly roving variables and we say, we're going to go one way, the most common, age 22, 40-year career, 7.2% interest rate, we can now understand it. We can ask money to freeze. Now, our situation may be different from that, but as long as we have a rule of thumb to start with, we can learn and we can add complexity later. But the point is, learn simple enough so that we can get started. So that by the time we're ready for complexity, we've been doing it 10 or 20 years and we didn't miss out on the power of 16.
Right. And so that's why for a beginner, you create the framework of let's just assume that you're starting at 22, that you're working a 40-year career, and that your money over the long term is going to make 7.2% as a rate of return. Let's just start with that set of assumptions so that you understand that every dollar that you invest at age 22 will multiply 16x. Every dollar you invest at 32 multiplies 8x. Every dollar you invest at 42 multiplies 4x. Right. And the corollary to that is every decade of life, your ability to multiply your money gets cut in half.
Yes. Enough to take action. The simplest understanding so that while we have that multiplying power when we're young, that we go ahead and take that action with confidence, with gusto, more than we would otherwise, because we have that understanding. And here's the thing, is that when we went into this and I told my wife, okay, we're going to save for my son's college education. Okay. I shouldn't say my son, our son. Okay, Sue, our son. And I got to the point where I said, all right, and we can stop now. And she said, what? What do you mean? Don't we need to keep putting money into this account until he's attending college? And I said, no, we can stop now because it's going to double. And it certainly has. So he's ready to go to college right now if he wanted to. But you see, it allowed me the ability to plan. I could front load his college education and stop. The money would double over 10 years. And during that time, we're moving on to the next thing. For some folks, dollar cost averaging is hard to understand. We might need a calculator, or we might need a financial advisor to tell us what's happening. But when we think of one input, $1 in, $16 later, it is now understandable. We don't need to know all the rest. We need to know enough to take the action. And 10 years later, 20 years later, we are smiling by the action that we took earlier. It's all about taking that confident action early. And the funniest thing about this whole college education thing is now my wife has come back and said, let's pour this money into a custodial account, separate money into a custodial account for our son. I'm like, whoa. Are you sure? That seems like a lot. So now she's more overboard than I am because she believes in this and she's seen it work.
Right. So don't worry about the complexity of it. You can deal with it later. If you're a beginner, the most important thing is just get started.
That is absolutely right. And you can invite in complexity later, 10 years later, 20 years later. I myself was middle-aged when I started to become familiar with finances. And I am very thankful that my father told me, invest in this 401k plan. There's free money in it. And that's what he told me. And so I did. Timidly, I wish I had done more. But because he did say that, and I did do that, I am pleased by what I'm seeing now 20 years later. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for spending this time with us. Where can people find you if they'd like to learn more?
financialepiphany.com.
Perfect. And we will link to that in the show notes. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Paula. So good to be here.